All right, I have just a couple more techniques that I want to share with you before we end this course. And this next one is another one that is quite useful and very commonly implemented in web applications of this sort. So here's the scenario. So far, we've been populating this table with our people records one at a time. But imagine if we kept doing that hundreds of times, right? The way this application is currently written, all of those records would always be retrieved from the database every time we refresh the page, and we'd be showing all of those records in this table. So eventually this table will just get longer and longer and longer, and at some point it just won't load anymore if we had hundreds of thousands of records or maybe millions or whatever. So generally, in order to prevent that kind of thing from occurring, you'll typically see applications of this sort use a technique called pagination. Pagination allows us to display one page of records at a time, rather than showing all of the records that the database may have. So if we were to implement pagination on this application, we might choose to show perhaps 5 or 10 records at a time. And then we'd have some little navigation buttons down here, either at the bottom or at the top of the table, that would allow us to go to the next page or go to the previous page or something like that. Or maybe you could even randomly skip around to a specific page, okay? So that's what we're going to learn how to implement now, pagination. So where we're going to begin is we're going to jump back over into the repository class, because Spring Data gives us some really easy, fantastic support for pagination all the way down at the database level. Consider, currently we're retrieving all of the records in the database, and it would be possible to implement a level of pagination without changing any of our database code. But in many cases, one of the most efficient ways to implement pagination, especially if you have the potential of having thousands or even millions of records in the database, is to actually implement the pagination starting at the database layer itself. In other words, you don't even want to retrieve all of the records from the database. So what we can do here to begin with is Spring Data actually supplies us with alternative interfaces that we can extend from to obtain more functionality. So if I put my cursor here on the CRUD repository, and then I'm going to do a Command B to jump into the definition for this interface, and then I come over here to this little arrow, and we've seen this before. If I click on this, this will show all of the subclasses of this interface. So I'm going to click on that now. And one of the subclasses or sub-interfaces that I want to draw your attention to is this one right here called Paging and Sorting Repository. I'm going to click on that. And so now we can see what additional methods this interface is defining on top of the CRUD repository that we are already using now. So we see here that it has a find all method that takes something called a sort. And this particular method allows us to specify a sort order for the results that we are getting back. So that could be quite useful. But then we also have this find all that takes something called a pageable. And basically, this version of find all will allow us to specify where out of a result set we want to begin and how many records in that result set we actually want to retrieve back. So although the method is called find all, if we use this pageable as an input to this method, we actually technically won't be finding all the records. We'll only be pulling back or retrieving just one page of those records, okay? And we define what is a page. I will also just draw your attention to the fact really briefly here that even this paging and sorting repository interface has some sub-interfaces itself, such as JPA repository in particular. And there are some useful methods here. I don't know that we'll bother to get into those in this course though, but I just wanted to draw your attention to that. Well, actually, I will show you one thing though. The JPA repository itself has a method has a useful method, delete all by ID in batch. So you may have noticed that currently when we select multiple records here to delete, the SQL that's being generated is performing the deletions one at a time. So we can actually see each explicit deletion that's occurring. If we wanted the ability to delete many records all at once, and we wanted to be able to do that more efficiently, like using an in clause or something like that, this method would likely be a good candidate for us to use. We're probably not going to bother to implement it, but it wouldn't be too hard for you to do that as extra credit homework on your own. So I just wanted to show you that. Okay. So here's our candidate though, paging and sorting repository. So what I'm going to do now is jump back over here to the person repository, and I'm going to actually just change what it is extending, okay? This would be a backward compatible change anyway, because the new paging and sorting repository extends from CRUD repository, as you just saw. So I'm just going to change this to paging and sorting repository. I don't even have to type out the whole thing. Hit enter. There we go. And then I will clean up my imports there. And so nothing's even broken because it's backward compatible. All right, the next thing I'm going to do is jump into the person service now, because we probably will now want to make some changes here. And also let me clean up my imports here. So we implemented a save, and then we've got this find all right here, but now we're gonna probably want to use that other find all, okay? So one way we could do this is scroll up a little bit, do a command in, choose Delegate Methods, just like we did before. I will select the person repository, click OK. And now again, I can just choose what additional method I want to generate a delegate for. And in this case, I only want this one, find all, that takes a pageable, right? And so I will click OK. And now the IDE has generated one more delegate find all method that takes a pageable, and it returns something called a page of person. Now you can think of that page as a page, right? So it basically is an object that encapsulates each of the records that are being returned from our query, okay? So instead of returning an iterable of people, it's now going to return a page of people, and then that page will contain a collection essentially of our people. Okay, so it's just a small layer of abstraction. And the reason for that is because it also will contain additional information like the total number of records that we have in the entire database, because you'll need that in order to calculate things like how many pages you should display and things of that sort. All right, so now we've got both the original find all and then this one. And eventually we can probably just get rid of this one here, but we'll keep it for right now so that we don't completely break all of our code. All right, so that's the next step. And then we'll jump over to our controller now. All right, so currently the way that we are bringing back those records is right here. And let me pull this out a bit. Right here with this model attribute get people method, right? So currently it's directly calling person repository.findAll, and we don't want that anymore, right? We want to now start using the person service to do these things. So this is pretty easy. First off, I will just call person service instead of person repository, and that didn't break anything. And then secondly, and this will be kind of interesting now, secondly, we're going to now allow the get people method here to take an input. And the input will be an instance of a pageable. So remember that this new paging and sorting interface that our repository is now extending from has a find all method that takes an input of a pageable, okay? And that's just an object that allows us to specify the details of the page that we want to pull back, right? Out of a full data set, where to start and how many records we want. So I will reference the pageable interface, and I will just call the instance page, like so. Now I can also specify a default page size, and that would just refer to how many records we want to see per page, okay? So I can specify a default, so that way, if it isn't specified from the browser, then we'll have a default. And the way to do that is with a special annotation, pageable default. And then I can specify a size. And you'll notice here, we can also specify sort information and directions for the sort order, a few other things as well. But for right now, we'll just focus on the size. And I think we'll set this to 5 for right now so that we can easily see the pagination actually working. If I set it to 10, then we wouldn't get any pagination until I created at least 11 records. And so what's going to happen here is, actually, let me expand this out. All right. So what will happen now, and make that even a little wider, is that Spring MVC will see that this model attribute method for retrieving the people wants an input of a pageable. And so Spring will search the incoming request for special parameters that map to this pageable, okay? Specifically, parameters that refer to what page we're on and what the size of a page is, okay? In addition to sort order and other things if we want to specify those as well. And it will match up those request parameters, if they exist in the request, into an instance of this pageable object, okay? So just like when we pass back a first name and a last name and all of those things, and those values get matched up to first name and last name fields of a person instance, right? It will now do with this pageable object too. And so that means we can now call the new version of the findAll method, which will take an instance of a pageable, like so. Now, this also means, though, that our return type is no longer going to be an iterable of persons, but it will now be a page of persons. So I can change that like so, and then I have to import that. All right. And so finally, let's jump over to the actual people.html template page. And we'll need to make some changes here. So we want to have one of those little Pagination Navigation things on our page somewhere. And if we jump over to Bootstrap and go to search and type in pagination, I only have to type in PAG, and then we'll click right here. So Bootstrap has some pagination components, if you will, that look good enough for what I think we want to do here, that we can use as a starting point. And there are various versions of this. So I think where we can start is just with the simple bit right here. So I'm going to just copy that and then come over here. And so now let's find our table. So here's our table. And if we jump back over to here. So what I'm thinking is maybe we just add this pagination widget right below the table itself, right below it. So here's our table. Right there, there's the end of it, and then there are our two buttons. So I'm thinking of just putting it right here. All right, so first let's just see how that's going to look. Yeah, that's good enough for now. Oh, now notice, we're already getting the pagination functionality. So in the response, notice now that in the URL, we've got this page equals 1 added in automatically. And if I come over here and I just put a 0 on that, look at that. There's our first page right there. So pagination is already working just that easily, okay? And we barely had to do anything at all to get this much working. And so now all we need to do is just to connect these paging parameters to these buttons down here. That's all that's left to do. All right, so here's our paging section. And I think maybe one of the first things we may want to do is to remove numbers 2 and 3 because we're going to programmatically generate these paging buttons here, okay? So we only need the first one, and then we'll use a loop to generate the additional ones. So the static 2 and 3 here can be removed by Thymeleaf. Okay, so that's the first thing I'd like to do. So I'm just going to, I don't know, maybe I'll do a multi-select cursor here, make a space, and then do a Thymeleaf remove equals all. So we'll just remove those two. I'm going to reload. There we go. Okay, so now we've just got the one. All right. Next step is to cause this one button here to loop over all of the pages that we actually will have. So I'll put my cursor right here, make a space, and so we can use the th each attribute, right? th each, so that we can loop. We'll specify the name of a variable that will represent each instance that we're going to be looking at. Now, let's make sure that you're clear on what we're looping over now. We're going to be generating pages, okay? So basically, let us imagine if we had 100 records in the database and we wanted to display 10 records per page, okay? Then that would mean we'd have 10 pages, right? And so we would want to generate a button for each of those 10 pages, 1 through 10. Okay, so that's what we're going to essentially do right here, is we're going to replicate this button however many times there should be pages for our total data set. That's what we're doing. So we will refer to a variable, and I think I will call that variable page, because I think that makes sense, right? And then the hyphen. And now we need to specify something like a collection that we're going to be iterating over. However, we don't explicitly have a collection of pages. So now I'm going to show you a technique that we haven't used before. This will kind of be like implementing a traditional old-fashioned for loop where we're looping from one number to an end number, okay? And the way we're going to do this is first we'll do a $, and then our curly braces. And then inside of this, we're going to refer to a Thymeleaf function. And I will show you where I'm getting this function from. If I go down here to the Thymeleaf documentation to the very bottom, numbers. So there are number functions in here. And one of the number functions that they provide us with is a function called sequence. This will generate a sequence, really an array of numbers, okay? And all we have to do is specify a starting number and an ending number, okay? And then it'll generate an array of those numbers. And then we can use that array right here, okay? So to use this, we do a $numbers.sequence, then parentheses, and then a start and an end number. So our starting number can be 0, meaning page 0, and then a comma. And then our ending number can be specified by referring to, let me show you this. So what we're returning from this controller now is a page of people, and we will refer to that page of people with the same variable that we were using before, which is people, okay? So if I jump back over here, I can refer to people. However, now this is really a page object, okay? And so this page object has methods on it. And one of the methods that it has on it is a method called getTotalPages, okay? And so I can simply refer to that method as total pages, all right? I can leave off the get because of the way that getters and setters work, right? And let me just show you so that you don't necessarily have to memorize all of this completely. So if I jump back over to the controller and then I jump into this page class, I'll do a Command B, all right? So then you can see all the methods here, and there it is, getTotalPages right there. So the nice thing is that this class will do that math for us. It already knows the number of total elements in the database, and then it can use that to determine the number of total pages based on our default page size, okay? So that's a nice convenience for us. All right, so jumping back over to the template now. So people.totalPages. Now, because this is a for loop that is going to be 0-based, we won't want to go from 0 to the number of total pages. We'll want to go to the total pages minus 1. Remember that we learned that when we learned about for loops, that if you're 0-based and you're wanting to count up to 10, you usually want to actually go from 0 to 9, right? If you want 10 items, 0 through 9, not 0 through 10, that would be one too many. All right, so we do the minus 1 there. So that's our setup for our loop. Then we want to actually use the loop, right? So let's jump back into our template here to generate more of these buttons. So here we've got what's called an anchor tag. And this anchor tag generates a link, okay? So when we click on this button, we want that to generate a GET request back to our controller, which would look just like this, right? So we'll request the people resource, but it will tack on this page equals, and then it will specify a page, okay? So we want each of these buttons that we're about to generate to generate this little page equals whatever. Okay, so if we click on 1, we actually want that to generate a page equals 0. If we had a 2, then we would want that to generate a page equals 1. And if it was a 3, then it would generate a page equals 2, because we'll be, the page number -1 because we're 0 based. Okay. And so we need to generate those links. Okay. And so this anchor tag here, that's what the A stands for. This anchor tag will render the actual link that we can click on to generate the GET request that tacks on this request parameter here, okay? So let me show you how we'll do this. So here we've got this href, and this pretty much corresponds to everything you see there, okay? Or it will when we're done with it, okay? So that basically specifies where do you want to link to, where do you want to go. So first off, we're going to change this href to be dynamic. And if we want to do that, then we need to turn it into a Thymeleaf href first off, okay? So th:/href. Then we'll get rid of this $ here. And now we can start to use some dynamic information. So when we are wanting to dynamically generate a link, we use an @ symbol and then the curly braces, okay? So Thymeleaf has all these different little symbols, right? We frequently have used a $ curly brace to refer to model attributes and variables, things of that sort. And now when we want to dynamically construct a new URL essentially, or a new resource with request parameters, we use an @ symbol and then curly braces, okay? And we will want this new resource to start off with the people resource, right? So that's where we want to start. So we'll go ahead and kind of hard code that in. And now to specify the parameters though, we can put those inside of parentheses, okay? So it's sort of like a method call. You can think of it like a method call. Make a get call to a people method and pass in these parameters. And that's what these are here. These are parameters that are being passed in, right? That's pretty much the same thing, okay? And so I think that's why Thymeleaf uses these parentheses here. All right, and then we want to refer to a variable. Now remember, when we set up our th:/each loop here, we said that we want each page in this loop to be stored inside of a page variable. And so now we will reference that page variable right here. All right, so now that we've got our parentheses here, we can pass in a parameter. And the parameter is going to take this format right here, page equals, and then a number. Obviously, that number should be dynamic, right? And so what we'll do here is we will type page equals, and then we will refer to the actual page number, which is a variable, which is this variable right here, right? And so to get our hands on that, we will use another $ curly brace, and then we can simply refer to page, right? So that lets us get our hands on that variable. Now, we also will want to dynamically change this number here. And to do that, we will still use a th:/text like we have done many times before. And then we can simply use another $ curly brace and refer to the page variable again. However, now in this first case, it will be 0. And we don't want to show a 0 though. We want to actually show a 1 again, because we're 0 based. And so what we can do here is just add 1 like so. All right, so I know that this is really complicated looking, and you may very likely just want to copy what I have here. There's no shame in doing that. That's often how we learn best, is just by copying. And then eventually, if you ever want to do something a little different from what I'm doing, you'll have to tweak it and play around with it a little bit, okay? But let's see if I even got this right myself. So I'm going to reload, and let's see if this is broken. Okay, so looks like it did what we needed, and we can even check what these links are actually pointing to. I'm going to turn on my dev tools. Let me bring that down a little bit. And then if I click on this little arrow thing here, I can highlight one of these, and that'll zoom me into the actual code that's being generated right there. And so that rendered an href equals people page equals 0. With the text of 1, and that looks right to me. And then I will look at the next one here, and the next one is page equals 1 with text of 2. So that looks correct to me. And I guess the real test is to actually try it out. Hey, look at that. I'm on page 2. And then I can click on this, and go back to page 1. So our pagination is basically already working right now. There you go. All right, now, if we want these previous and next buttons to work, we need to do similar things though. So to wire those up, again, I will change this thref. Now note, I'm on the previous button here, right? The HTML for the previous button. All right, so let's pull this out and we will modify this th:/href. We'll get rid of the $, and we will do a lot of what we have here. In fact, I don't know, maybe we could even just start off with all of that, perhaps. So I will copy all of that, paste it here. Now, what we will do differently, though, is we don't actually have this page object up here, because this page object that we copied from here is the variable that came from our loop, right? That's this guy here. Up here, we don't have that, and we don't need it either. So what we do have, though, is the actual people object, which is being returned by, our controller method. Let me just remind you. And again, I know that this can probably look a little confusing. I think you're really going to have to just spend your own time to kind of dig into this on your own and make sure that your brain can process it all. I can only give you so much in a limited amount of time here. But that people object that I'm referring to is really this page object here, okay? And again, if we jump onto this page object, you will see that it has a number of properties and methods on it. And let's see, one of them is, if I do a command F12, we can see all of the methods. And let's see, one of them is, get number, which refers to essentially the current page, okay? They say returns the number of the current slice. A slice, if you think of 100 elements, a slice would be some range within that 100 elements, and a range within a number of elements is a page, okay? So a slice is, in this case, a page. Sorry for how indirect it is, but that's what that really means. All right, so we're going to get back that page, and then we can do page.number to get what page we're currently on, okay? So if we jump back over to here, then we can say people.number, which gives us the page number. That's what that really is referring to, page number. And then -1. So I think that should do it. Let's reload and see if I broke anything. Okay, nothing's broken there. So I'm going to jump first to page 2, and then I will click the previous button. Hey, look at that. That works. All right. Now, one thing, when we're on page 1, we should not be able to click this button again. In fact, let's see what happens if I do. Nothing. But it's awkward to do so because now it's requesting -1, page -1, okay? So what would be nice is if we would just disable this button if we're already on the first page, and we can actually do that pretty easily. So if we jump over here to Bootstrap, we will see that it is possible to disable a button by using the disabled class. Now notice here in the documentation, they use this .disabled, okay? But when we're using it inside of a class attribute, like here, you leave the dot off and then you just state disabled, okay? So what we wanna do is we want to conditionally append a disabled class to our list of classes if we're on the first page, okay? That's what we want to do. All right, so what we can do here is we can use a Thymeleaf attribute called th::class append, and I think this might be a new one for you, but this will allow us to programmatically append additional styles or classes onto this class attribute here, okay? And so we want to do this conditionally though. So we will use our $ and curly braces here to refer to a variable, essentially. And the variable we want to use here will be our page object that's coming back from the controller. So again, let me just show you. So here's our page object. And this object has, again, a lot of methods and properties on it. And we've got another method here called isFirst. Where's that at? It's in here somewhere. IsFirst, right. So that just lets us know really easily if we're on the first page or not, right? And so we can use that. If we jump back over here, So we can call people.first. I don't need to put the is on here because a common convention of getter methods for Boolean properties is that they will be named is something, okay? And so all of this code understands that. And so it will see that I'm referring to something called first, and it will check to see if there is a method called is first. All right, and so then I can use a ternary operator and then just return back a value. So if we're on the first page, then I want to append a class of disabled, like so. And let's reload and see if I broke anything. Hey, there we go. And I don't know if you noticed that, but now that previous button is subtly disabled. It's gray, whereas it was blue before, okay? So that worked there. And then we'll do the same thing for the next button right here. So in fact, I'm just gonna copy all of that and then come down here to my list item and paste. And I think the property here is called last. And we'll do the exact same thing. And I will reload. Oh, and we also need to implement the code on the next button, don't we? So again, we'll just copy all of this from the previous and do basically the opposite thing. Copy all of that, then come down here, replace this, paste that, and then instead of a -1, we'll do a +1, right? Whoops, went a little too far there. Okay, yeah, a +1, and then let's reload. Okay, so now click next, and we're on the next page, and now that is grayed out, okay? And that is pagination. So I know that this probably looks pretty complicated and confusing. Some of that is because of the weird way that you have to implement this logic and squeeze it all into HTML attributes, okay? So that's a little bit unfortunate. But if you just sit down and really spend some time with this, or you even really just copy what I have here, every time you want to do this type of pagination, it's probably not really going to change too much, the basic approach that I used here. That's fine too. Don't feel too bad. It can be a little bit confusing to look at, but this is how you can implement some basic pagination. So one last thing we can do now, just to see it even better, if I jump back into the controller and let's change the default page size, let's reduce that to maybe 3 records per page, okay? And reload. Okay, so now we've got 3 pages, and I will click on the first page there, and then, oh, and you know what else I forgot to do? So down here in this little pagination component, I forgot to implement the ability to highlight what page we're actually on. Okay, so let's do that real quick. So we'll jump back over into the template page here, and let's make some room here, and we're already in that section. And so the way to do this is that, well, here, actually, let me show you how I know how to do these things. Okay, so if we jump back over here to the Bootstrap and go back into our pagination documentation here. Yeah, so right down here where we learned how to disable the previous and the next buttons, we also learned how to make a button show up as active, and that just makes it highlighted like you see right there. And all that has to be done is to add in the active class on that button's class. So here they are doing it right there. This list item class equals page item space active. So we just need to conditionally throw that word active in there, okay? So that's how we do that. So then if we jump back over to here, so the key is that here, let's make a little bit of room, a little more room rather. Okay, so the key here is to know that, let me, you know what, this will probably be a little less confusing to look at if we just ignore these, because remember, these are actually getting removed. These two are being removed, right? So where we really want to focus right now is just on this one line right here, because this is the line that's going to be replicated however many times we have pages, right? And so what we would need to do here in order to implement that, here is the class for this list item, and that's where we would need to conditionally add in the active class, okay? Or the active style, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so we need to do that conditionally. And we know how to do that. We can just use this class append, right, from Thymeleaf, okay? Now the question is, what is the logic? How do we determine when we should be appending that term, that style of active into our classes? Well, basically, we just need to know that as we're iterating over the pages and rendering these page buttons here, we need to just basically test, is the number for this button equal to the actual page that we're on? Okay, that's what we need to do. So the page that we are currently on is always going to be contained inside of this people variable here, and specifically in its number property, okay? So the people.number property will give us the current page that we are on. So that's one piece. And then the second piece is that we just need to know which button we're actually on when those buttons are being rendered. Remember, these three buttons in this particular case are being rendered in a loop, right? And here's the loop. This th:(each) thing here is our loop. Here's where we're generating a sequence of numbers, which will become an array. And then for each iteration of the loop, those numbers get stored one at a time in this variable called page. So this variable holds the current number of the current button that we are rendering on the screen. Okay, so basically we just need to test, does this page button's value equal people.number? If yes, then render out that active style, okay? So let's see how we can do this. So maybe I will put that right here. All right, so we're gonna use the th:(class append equals. So we'll use our $ curly braces here, and then we'll say people.number equals, and then another one for the page variable, right? That's what we're storing each number in, the page variable. So if the current page that we are viewing is equal to the page button or page number value, whatever you want to call it, of the button that we're rendering, that's what's stored in this variable here. Okay, I know that these terms are probably not the greatest terms, and I apologize for that. So anyway, if those two are equal, and we'll use our ternary here, which I will kind of read as if, right? So if the current page is equal to the number of the button that we are rendering right now, then return active, like so. And that should be all we need. So let me put this back, and then let's reload. Hey, and we got something there. So now if I click on next, looking good. Looking good. So now our next button is disabled and the 3 is highlighted. All right, so that was just a little bit of cleanup. So we'll go ahead and stop here so that I can make extra room for the next lesson, because the next lesson is probably going to need it, okay? So I'll see you in the next one. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this content and you'd like to help me out, there are several ways you could do that. First, you can always click the like and subscribe. That'll help me out a lot. Additionally, another way you can help me out is to check the link in the description below. That'll link you to my website where you can find additional courses. And finally, for those of you who might be interested in starting a new career as a professional software developer, I offer a free PDF guide that will detail exactly how you can get started in this field with no college degree and no prior experience. All you need to do is click on the link in the description below. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one.